to another episode of the Fully Charged Show podcast. I don't know how I've got to do some explanation for this episode because it is pretty exceptional, a real pleasure. So to record this was amazing. Let me just not overblow everything too much. I don't want to build it up too much, but it is incredible. This is an amazing episode. I've managed to capture a chunk of technological history that is really important, and it's important to understand. But I just want to go back to explain, to put some of the things in context, because my guest this week, Rachel Konrad, and I have known each other for quite some time. Not well. I've met her a few times in various extraordinary roles, but she really is an exceptional force of nature. This is great fun, this episode. So Rachel Konrad was born and raised in Detroit in the United States. She worked at a company called Tesla Motors from 2008 to 2011. Just to explain that at that time, Tesla was a very, very small company with a very, very small chance of survival. It nearly went under again and again and again. It nearly failed so many times. But that was the period where they launched the Tesla Roadster. You can see one right up there, a little model of one. And where they, by the end of the time she was there, they had launched the Tesla Model S, or about to launch it. She then went to a big car show in Paris where she met a man called Carlos Ghosn. She explained some of this. I just want to put this into context just in case people aren't aware. But people are going to be extremely aware of Elon Musk and Tesla. Don't have to explain any of that. And so she obviously worked with Elon very directly for those early startup years. But then she worked for a man called Carlos Ghosn. Now, if you haven't heard of Carlos Ghosn, he was the CEO of the Renault-Nissan Alliance in around 2011 to around, I don't know whenever he was arrested or he escaped. Well, I can explain that in a moment. So Carlos Ghosn was an extraordinary man. So Rachel got me in a Tesla Roadster very early on, one of the very early episodes that I made about cars, or I think even possibly pre-fully charged. She then got me to interview Carlos Ghosn. I drove him to an airport in a Nissan Leaf. That was a very early episode of the Fully Charged show. So she was there from 2011 to 2016. She then met a man called Pat Brown. Now, Pat Brown formed a company called Impossible Foods. And Impossible Foods made some of the very early, incredibly well-made, quite expensive when they first came out, how can it not be meat burgers. It cooked like meat. It smelt like meat. It looked like meat. It looked like a beef burger, but there were no animals involved. And in order to produce it, it required like 2,000 liters less water. It required 550 kilos less grain than it would to produce the equivalent beef burger. And they really did some brilliant marketing, and Rachel was very involved in that. So Impossible Foods, she worked at from 2016 to 2021. And now she works for a company, organization called the Production Board. And the founder and CEO of the Production Board is a man called David Friedberg. And David Friedberg is one of the 4 billionaire entrepreneurs who appear on the Allin podcast, which is the #1 tech business podcast in the history of the world. So that's what she's done. And bizarrely, I have interviewed one of the people who is on the Allin podcast, a man called Jason Calacanis, who's an extraordinary man. So she's had this amazing life. She now also lectures at Stanford Uni. We talk briefly about that. But I just wanted to put that bit of history into context. So it's zero carbon cars and meat. And she's done a lot of other things that we do mention in her extraordinary career. And I'm really hoping we can get her to come to a fully charged everything electric event, either in the UK or in Canada. I think Canada's very likely. I think so. That's it, really. That's who I'm talking to this week, and that explanation gives a tiny hint of what this woman has done. She's truly extraordinary. And it was a such a stroke of luck to meet her by chance, I think in London originally, and find out what she was doing and find out about Tesla and all those things. Anyway, that's enough. I don't want to go on too much. I do want to tell you that please do subscribe to the Fully Charged Show. No, the Everything Electric Show. Yes, both. There we go. Losing the plot, as always. Tell your mates about it, though, because as you can see, this episode is proof positive that we do have some truly remarkable people on this show. So please, without more ado, welcome Rachel Konrad to the Fully Charged Show podcast. So, Rachel, I mean, this is such a thrill for me because in a way, you were so critically important at the very, very start of me trying to make a show about electric vehicles. Because if it hadn't been for you and you facilitating me being able to, drive a Tesla Roadster around the Silicon Valley, I mean, I don't want to do all reminiscing all the time, but can we just go back to that period? So you were at Tesla 2008 to 11, is that correct?
Yeah, I started at Tesla in mid 2008 in the peak of Carmageddon, right? Remember that? General Motors and Chrysler declared bankruptcy in 2008. Ford was about to, but just like barely managed to get through. We had the federal mortgage crisis, and the Lehman Brothers liquidity crisis. It was probably the worst time ever to start any car company, let alone an electric vehicle company. It was really lean times. I mean, Elon Musk, who even back then was a very well-known, very well-respected technologist in Silicon Valley, Elon Musk could barely raise any money from the conventional venture capital on Sand Hill Road, right? That's how bad it was. Everything was frozen. And, Elon used to say to me back then that there's probably a 95% chance that Tesla fails, but if we don't even try, there is a 100% chance that the big incumbent industry will, carbonize Earth and make it unlivable. So we got to try. So that was the context when I met you, and we drove around in a little Tesla Roadster up the hills above Silicon Valley. It was really, really scary times.
And I mean, at that time, it was so weird, and it felt so like such a micro niche of activity, that there was, I'd met, by the time I met you, I'd probably met 20 people who had used the two words electric and car in the same phrase. It just wasn't known. I mean, it was such early times, and that was an extraordinary step that you were involved in. I mean, real bit of proper, genuine technological history was happening when you were there. I mean, I don't know, because I don't think I was aware of it, but I remember in the showroom, which was Menlo Park. I've remembered it. Yeah. So I do have a picture of me standing next to a hollow model of a Tesla Model S, which then
the glider.
Wow. Yep. I mean, just because it looked nothing, because I had a Tesla Model S a few years later, but that was, such a...
Well, that was one of the most important things that we did, I think, in those early days was, yes, there is the glider from Hethel, Lotus, et cetera, right? And we're going to stuff it with batteries, and that's going to sort of be the proof of concept, right? But we really need to be talking about and showing that this is not a little company for rich hippies making $150,000 Tesla Roadster sports car like the one you have on your shelf there. But actually, the entire intention is to effectively use the Roadster to subsidize and to fund the development of more and more mainstream mass market cars. Because if you're just competing for, the $150,000 niche, that's, I don't even know, 0.5% of the total global car market, you have to hit these $50,000 prices, or lower. And that was the entire goal. So we always tried to talk a lot about that because that was why the company was started. That was Elon's entire brilliance, was to start at the high end, and then go mainstream mass market from there.
And I mean, it is the most remarkable thing when because we've talked about Tesla on the show forever, so we don't need to go into it in great detail, but it is just that phenomena that it has gone from this, really quirky niche startup in Menlo Park in Silicon Valley to there's no one who hasn't heard of it in the developed world. There might be people in the world who've not heard of Tesla, but there's not many anymore. It's just
they're living under a rock. Yeah. And the most important thing, by the way, is from my perspective. I mean, remember, I'm this girl from Detroit. I born and raised there. My entire family worked in the auto industry. I applied for a Lee Iacocca fellowship to go to college, right, back in the 1900s, as my teacher used to say. And the most important thing that Elon did actually was not to build a brand or even to become profitable or anything like that. It was to compel the rest of the incumbent auto industry to get off their high carbon, gross polluting and compete with electric cars. And that's why you're seeing such a big shift. It was entirely because of Tesla. I mean, the whole reason that Ford Motor Company is creating basically two companies, one to house its old incumbent internal combustion engine technology and another that's electric, it is because of Tesla. Trust me, I've worked in the incumbent industry. The only reason that Volkswagen and Mercedes and Nissan and General Motors and Stellantis or whatever it's called today are doing electric is because of Tesla. And that is the true calling of a startup, is to force the entire industry to shift to a new technology that's frankly better for driving, better for the planet.
No, I mean, it is an extraordinary. I don't think it can't be overstated. And what we're now dealing with is how it's affecting the world on a global level. And we'll talk about this later on. But because of what we saw at our most recent show in Amsterdam, there were about 9 car companies with big displays there, and they're all Chinese. Tesla. There was Tesla and about 8 other companies, and most people in Europe wouldn't have heard of those companies. The obvious big ones, Zeekr, BYD, NIO, had big stands there with cars that people liked, that were really well made. And a lot of what's fascinating is when you start to meet engineers who worked at Tesla, but previously had worked at BMW, but now work at BYD or at Zeekr. They're doing the rounds, and those. I don't want to go on about it now, but those cars are really well made. 10 years ago, I remember seeing 12 years ago, Chinese-built cars at Geneva Motor Show, and it was like, I wouldn't really want to go in one. And now they're as good as anything made in Europe or North America.
Exactly. Yeah. And even in the United States, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, all of the electric cars produced by the domestic companies here in the United States were what we call compliance cars. They were specifically made in order to pass California Air Resource Board and California regulations around smog reduction. And they were only sold in order for these companies to sell their big Cadillac Escalades and Nissan Armadas and all of those cars, right? Because they had to, right? They had to produce these cheesy little cars. So they just wanted to just get them out the door for as little money and R&D costs as possible, right? But guess what? Now they actually have to compete against Tesla, which is really, really difficult because, by the auto industry's own admission, the Tesla is 6 or 10 years ahead of anything else on the market.
No, I mean, I think what I wanted to underline is regardless of anything that's happened in let's say the last 18 months with Mr. Musk, completely forget that. What he achieved with those two companies, SpaceX and Tesla, is off the scale incredible. I mean, when I talk about Tesla sometimes, and particularly when I do public talks, I do want to talk about the engineers and the other people. I actually think of you, and I also think of, is it Diarmuid O'Connell that I drove in the car? So I think of people like that. There were people who are totally focused and dedicated to make that thing work. I want to give them a bit of airtime because the media always goes, Elon. And I go, but he didn't actually build the drivetrain and the axle. There was an engineer that did that, or the engineer that worked, J.B. Straubel, who worked on the battery. You know, there's people that were involved in that.
Peter
Yeah.
Rawlinson, who dedicated the rest of his career to Lucid, to, to continue the legacy that Elon created. I mean, this ultimately is going to be the biggest legacy of Elon and Tesla, right? I mean, Elon didn't start that car company. He didn't become CEO of it in order to find glory, or frankly, even to become the world's richest man. I mean, he lives like a monk, right? I mean, so that's really not what motivates him. It was not to build a brand. It was literally to decarbonize energy and transportation of the world's most vile, gross polluting industries. And to do that, he leveraged this very subversive system called capitalism and forced the incumbent industry to actually build electric cars that don't suck, that aren't just compliance cars. And in so doing, he literally trained and inspired tens of thousands of employees like me and Diarmid and Peter and JB and so many others, right? Who then went on to do similar things. Elon, in many real ways, ignited the climate tech phenomenon that is truly going to be the economic engine of the next 50 years. And again, I'm not an apologist for him. I'm not an acolyte, but that is all on him. He really did ignite this investment trend, the sector, and this concept that you can dedicate your career to decarbonizing the planet. And in so doing, you can become the world's richest person, right? I mean, who would have thought that? There's so much gloom and doom right now in the world, and people are worried about the environment. And it's like, if you don't understand that, Elon Musk, whose virtually entire business empire is around decarbonizing Earth, and failing that, making humanity continue to survive by blasting us all to Mars. With that portfolio, he has become world's richest person. If you are not paying attention to that, if you are not following the money, you are being willfully ignorant and needlessly depressed, honestly.
Excellent.
I mean, 25% of all new car sales in California are now electric. And that, again, that is all on him. That California is, to this day, it remains the biggest, single, most lucrative region for car sales because of the unique combination of the high car density along with luxury and things like that, high wealth, et cetera. So it's obviously not the largest single car market, but it is the most lucrative. And it still sets the pace for the entire industry, right? 25% electric. And guess what? That number's not going down. And so that is all on Elon. I mean, thank God he cranked it out and grinded it out from 2008 to, the next 10 years, honestly. He didn't make a profit for, I don't even know, 15 years?
Yeah, long time. But now, unbelievable. I mean, what's happening around the world. Yeah. But no, let's move, because I want to move on a bit because of Carlos Ghosn. That was the most, that was the last time we met in the real world, was in London when I drove you and just the most bizarre thing that happened. And then the story of what happened to
I was lying down in the back so that your cameras didn't see this random photo bomber sitting behind you.
It was
right?
great.
It was known.
Yeah.
And I was like down there.
No, unfortunately, the cameras are very wide. You are in the show. But it's fine. It doesn't matter. But the thing that I've always regretted. So that's out of all the conversations I've had with all the people I've met in connection with this, I've never said anything as dumb as I did to Carlos Ghosn. So we were driving along in a Nissan Leaf, and he asked me, "What do you think of the Leaf?" And I genuinely was really impressed with that car. I had one. I've still got it. My daughter, it's here. It's charging as I speak. My daughter's just driven home in it. I think I said something like, it's amazing for a first generation of a brand new car with new technology. It's as good as a Volkswagen Golf. Now, I meant that in terms of its build quality and the fact that it didn't wobble when you went over a bump, and it was tightly made and it was really well constructed. But I couldn't see his face when we were driving, but when I looked at it on the camera, he was not happy. But we survived.
Volkswagen, Volkswagen was and remains for many auto industry execs as, sort of the evil Goliath, right? And, in particular, when Carlos Ghosn engineered the Renault-Nissan merger, the CEO and chairman, Ferdinand Piech of Volkswagen said something really disparaging, like, two mules together don't make a racehorse, right? And Ghosn replied, yeah, but this is an industry of mules, right? And it is, right? It is a brutal regime. And the racehorses tend to have to go out to pasture and get shot as soon as they, sprain an ankle. So it was a pretty interesting analogy.
But I mean, also that was the battle that he had internally, which I assume you would have been party to, was quite a tough. I mean, that it's also unimaginably complicated, I would think, for someone of his racial background, if you like, to operate within a big Japanese company. I don't know if it had ever happened before. I mean,
I would also argue that his racial background, his upbringing, was actually the reason why he could operate, right? He's really, in many ways, this kid from everywhere, right? He was born in Amazonia, in Rondônia, the middle of the jungle. And then he was raised in Rio, and then moved when he was 6 years old to Lebanon, and then educated in the French system in Lebanon, and then moved to the Grandes Écoles, like the Ivy League of France when he was 16 years old. Spoke 5 languages, right? I mean, that's precisely why he could operate in a very, very cross-cultural environment. And that's why he could keep these two companies, Renault and Nissan, together, right? I mean, as you know, as a student of the auto industry, car companies, big incumbent companies, want to fly apart. They're highly nationalistic in ways that banks are not, right? Like bank mergers happen all the time. No one knows. Pharmaceutical companies merge. You don't know whether the company is Swiss or Indian or whatever, but car companies are highly nationalistic, and there are virtually no examples of car companies that can do a very fine dance of an acquisition, right? Most of them, like Volkswagen, they'll just sort of buy these Skoda or Seat or whatever. They're a shell company, and they just take them over. They become just a local brand. But Ghosn was trying to do something very different, which was keep two thriving, very proud companies from different cultures together, which is extraordinarily difficult. And frankly, he always knew that, the biggest threat that he faced, the potential seeds of his own demise, were actually because of that, right? Because both France and Japan were highly protective of what they perceived as their industrial crown jewels. And they didn't want, France to take over Japan Inc. And they didn't want, Japan to take over, the crown jewels of the French Empire. And that's really what precipitated his demise, which is, frankly, why he's now an Interpol wanted fugitive in Lebanon.
It's the most extraordinary story. I mean, I just very briefly, are there any other, high-ranking executives you've ever worked with or who've ended up effectively on the run? It's just the most extraordinary turnaround in events, isn't it? I mean, it is.
Yeah. Ghosn is amazing. So I live out here in Silicon Valley, and very few people have even heard of or care about Carlos Ghosn, right? Well, Elon, that's all anyone wants to talk about out here. But frankly, in many meaningful ways, the most extraordinary boss I've ever had is Carlos Ghosn, because again, of his very unusual upbringing, spoke 5 languages fluently. I mean, you've seen him. Like, we would go to these big auto shows, and we would line up, okay, Carlos Ghosn, it's CNN Live,
Yeah.
okay, boom in English. And then France 24, okay, boom in French. And then TV Globo,
Wow.
boom Portuguese. And then Al Arabiya, boom. And then he would even do like
Yeah.
Spanish, and he could even get by a little
Yeah.
bit in Japanese. It was extraordinary. And the fact that he, through his own force of will, could hold together these two companies that truly want to fly apart, right? That's all on him. And you've seen, since he's been gone, the companies have essentially flown apart, right? He's really, I used to call him the Abraham Lincoln of our industry, because just like Abraham Lincoln held the North and the South and kept union in the United States, that's kind of what he did for Renault and Nissan, and then incorporated Mitsubishi and Lada and Bajaj and all of these car companies. It was because of who he was and the unique post-national thing that he was trying to create, right? And it needs someone like that. It needed someone like that. It doesn't have that now. And again, it's just flying
But I mean,
apart.
I'm intrigued as to know how you went from Tesla to Renault-Nissan and to Carlos Ghosn. I mean, were you headhunted, or did you go, I'd like to work with a company that is now trying to transition? Because at that time, that was at the very launch of the Leaf and the Renault Zoe and all that stuff that was happening. That's where I got, for the first time in my life, people rang me. So the guy from Nissan rang me. The people from Renault rang me and took me to Paris and showed me the factory. And this is where the batteries are. That had never happened before. It was me ringing out going, can I come and look at your electric car? And they'd go, they were too busy. And suddenly, these people wanted someone like me to be pushing it. But I mean, how did that come about?
Well, so I had worked for Tesla, not only here in the United States in the Silicon Valley office, but then Elon dispatched me to the UK, which is where we met. And I spent a year working in Windsor, where the global headquarters, the non-US headquarters of Tesla were. And whenever Elon would come to Europe, usually to visit Hethel or our, like carbon fiber plant in France, right? I would also arrange for him to go talk to the Financial Times or to go to the Sorbonne and give a speech at the time of the Paris Motor Show, etc. And I happened to be at the Paris Motor Show, and I mean, almost literally bumped into Carlos Ghosn. And he was looking for a person who was not French, not Japanese, who knew about emerging technologies, who had reported to a very brilliant, demanding CEO, in order to create a new sort of comms, marketing, branding team for the Renault-Nissan alliance. And I met him and I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And Ghosn's pitch to me was, look, you've done this for Elon. You could stay there another 5 or 10 years, but like that train is already moving and it's very meaningful. But if we don't get big incumbent industry on board, it's a rounding error, right? And while Elon is building this $150,000, sports car for the rich, we want to industrialize electric vehicle manufacturing. And we have a plan to convert 4 plants into EV manufacturing. And we're going to do it with not only the Nissan Leaf, but the Zoe and future versions of Infiniti and other cars, right? So why don't you join us? And I was like, wow, okay. And it was an amazing experience. Don't get me wrong. But I did it for 5 years. And after 5 years, I kind of could understand that the true calling of a startup is not just to build a brand or to, create revenue that lines the coffers of the investors or anything like that. It's to compel an entire industry. So the first chance I got, I came back to Silicon Valley to work at another startup, Impossible Foods, in the totally different industry of food and ag, which also desperately needs to be decarbonized. So ultimately, the Renault-Nissan experience for me was phenomenal. Probably the most just, learning fulcrum that I've ever been in. But at the same time, it kind of reinforced my idea that, if you really want to make an impact in the world, startups are where you do it.
I mean, that is really, because that was, I mean, it is, I will have to explain in my introduction that, that my experience is Tesla. Well, it was because of Rachel. Renault-Nissan. Well, it was kind of because of Rachel. Impossible Foods. Well, yeah, that was kind of because of Rachel.
Yeah. Well, I called you. I mean, when, I got into Renault-Nissan, and there was, that was a real cultural, wow. Okay. I'm living in France. I'm going to Japan every month. My first trip to Japan was with Ghosn during the Great East Japan tsunami.
You're kidding. Were you in Japan when that happened? But just
not
afterwards.
When it happened, afterward. Yeah. Ghosn was the first CEO from abroad to basically come in, and we toured the Iwaki factory, which is where all of the Infinity engines are built, right? And there was I don't even remember, a 7-foot crack in the concrete. And, Ghosn fearlessly walked into the radiation zone. Gambate, we got this. And really fired up the troops. And that is the Ghosn I know. I mean, he is absolutely a tour de force. I'm 100% sure that history and the court of public opinion will completely exonerate him, even if he never has that, official judicial justice, right? But he is an incredible executive, a real student of humanity. And just could walk into any room with any demographic and make an immediate connection and get them to really comply, to execute, to be fired up about a mission. He's incredible.
When I was completely blown away from meeting him that very brief time. I mean, he was obviously very impressive guy. But that is also fascinating because this is in a discussion I literally had this previous weekend about vehicle to grid, and the actual history of that stuff is. We've got a Nissan Leaf with a CHAdeMO connector. We can send electricity either way. We can use these to help recover people and stuff and support in the areas that were badly affected by the tsunami because there's no petrol there. They can't get gasoline.
It was in March of 2011. And there were, obviously a lot of people needed to be rescued under the rubble. They needed food. They needed electricity, and there was no way to get it there. And you could not get petrol into the region. And so Nissan dispatched something like 50 Leafs to the area, and they effectively were the ambulances. They were the food delivery vehicles. They got people out of the zone, out of the radiation zone. And, I don't think Nissan will ever get full credit for that. The comms team, I remember I had a conversation with them and I was like, whoa, we should get some photos of that out. That's incredible. And they were like, Rachel-san, no, that is bragging. Right. Wow. We don't want to do that. And I was like, okay, I got it. But, that's what an electric vehicle can do, right? I mean, we only have electric vehicles in our house, and they're powered by the solar panels on our roof. And here in California, we deal with these rolling brownouts, right? And I literally charge my computer and my phones in the Tesla. It's no problem.
But then, so let's go on to Impossible Foods, because I think that is really fascinating. I just want to tell you this silly idea I had when I was about 22, and I cooked a pie for some friends of mine in London. I was living in a rural area. And I shot a duck and a rabbit, and I wrung the neck of a chicken, and I butchered them and prepared them and made a game pie with beautiful pastry. I'd spent all day doing it. I was really proud of it. It was a big pie. It fed like 8 people. And the people who came just went, oh my God, this is amazing. This is beautiful. We're talking about, this is in the 1970s. And it was a horrible experience doing that, killing those animals. But I thought I've got to do it, because if I don't and I eat meat, I'm a massive, unforgivable, scummy hypocrite if I can't do it. So then I did this thing, cooked this food, and they all loved it. And then 2 of them in particular, the young woman said, I'm not going to name her, I still know her, said, where did you get the stuff from? Is there a local butcher? It's so good. And I said, no, I killed it. It was running around the farmyard this morning. I was living on a little farm. And she almost vomited with the shock and the horror. She couldn't, and she looked at me like I was a murdering, filthy, hideous, vile, it's really like, you killed him. And I went, that hypocrisy just has never left me. And so I wanted to invent a meat license that a child, when they reach 18, they go into a government-sanctioned place. If they want to eat meat, they go in there and it's all done really properly, very safely, but the cow is brought in, or a pig or a sheep, and they kill it like with a captive bolt gun, and they have to butcher it. And once they've done that, they then get a meat license for 10 years. And the meat-eating percentage of the population would drop to about 0.3. And that hypocrisy has always bugged me. But I mean, I'm a vegetarian 99% of the time, and occasionally I will eat something. But what you did with Impossible Foods and what they're doing is fascinating, and I think it is a critically important step for someone who has eaten meat and goes, well, can I have a burger? You go, yeah, you can.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to mention one thing, because I know this is like a real car enthusiast.
But we are bigger than that. We've gone wider. But anyway, yes, but anyway.
Well, that's my point is, I had been working in the auto industry. And again, remember, I am a girl from Detroit, right? And I had worked for Elon and Carlos Ghosn, right? I was at the peak of my game, right? And back in 2015 at the COP21 conference in Paris, where I was bringing Carlos Ghosn to do some media events, I met Pat Brown, the CEO and founder of Impossible Foods. And he said to me, Rachel, you know what your problem is? And I was like, I don't have a problem. I am at the top of my game. What is the problem? And he said, your problem is that you've picked the wrong industry. And the reality is that, the auto industry is on a good trajectory thanks to what Elon and you have done. The rest of the industry will follow, but nobody's talking about food. And actually everything else, cement, energy, transportation, building, manufacturing, and energy and materials, all of that is a rounding error compared to the food system. If you want to decarbonize, you got to decarbonize food. And I mean, I remember when he said it to me, it really flipped me into a little petit crise, as the French like to say. I went home and I did some research and he was right, honestly. So I really am a passionate believer, obviously, in decarbonizing the transport sector, the energy sector. But frankly, you can be a vegan who drives a Cadillac Escalade SUV, and you will have a vastly smaller carbon footprint for you as an individual than a meat eater who drives a Tesla. That's just reality. And if we don't decarbonize the food and ag space, it almost really doesn't matter how many people drive electric. It's that big of a deal. So Pat recruited me based on that. And given the real stark contrast I could see between Tesla startup and Renault-Nissan incumbent, I was like, if we're going to decarbonize this, we need to do it through a startup, right? So I moved my family 6,000 miles and left this incredible velvet coffin of Paris where I had a great life, but moved back to the Silicon Valley, clown show of startups. And it was absolutely phenomenal. And to be clear and give credit to Elon, I replicated the comms marketing brand playbook of Tesla, or I tried to anyway, at Impossible Foods. So, and it was very, very similar in that, because we are starting with very limited amount of product, we didn't have a lot and it was expensive because we had just started producing it. You start at the high end,
Yeah.
and you go down, right? Just like Elon started at the high end, we're trying to compete with people who are going to buy a Lambo or a Maserati. We wanted to compete, at restaurants that had a $25
Yeah.
burger, right? And then you develop all the messaging around the sustainability, and you get your evangelists, your early adopters, and then as you build out the cogs, right? The cogs go down and you get more and more economies of scale. Well, then your message changes, you go more and more mainstream, mass market, et cetera. But it was very much in Elon's playbook. We didn't do any ads.
Right.
We didn't pay a single influencer. We didn't have an ad agency or anything like that. And again, it was just, I was really just
Yeah.
channeling Elon in
Right.
those early
That is
years.
fascinating because because I don't know whether or how whether Impossible are trading in the UK because I'm not as aware of them as I am in the United States. But I mean, when I had my first Impossible burger, which was thanks to you and a little cafe in Los Angeles, I think it was great. It was such. It
Yeah,
was. I mean,
yeah.
they are amazing, and it is an extraordinary experience to have it. And but
Yeah,
what in a sense, I can really see that now. Though, so say at that time, which I can't remember when that was, but when you were working there somewhere, 2016, 17, 18, somewhere around that time. Um,
yeah,
if I'd gone to our local supermarket near where I live, which there would have been there might have been a veggie burger that was sort of like a patty that was
right.
made of beans and peas and some. There might have been one.
Exactly.
Now there's a whole section made by many different companies. I mean,
Exactly.
Linda McCartney being the obvious one in the UK. Linda McCartney, vegetarian
Yep.
food, but there's a huge range of it, and that is, in a sense, Impossible Burger was the Tesla, and all these other Renaults and the Nissans and the Volkswagen Electrics and all that. Yeah,
Come along. We
yeah,
need the entire sector again. Just the same way Elon, unfortunately, has to rely to some extent on
yeah,
incumbent tier 1, 2, 3 suppliers or battery production with Panasonic or Sony or whoever. Right? You do
yeah,
need the incumbent industry to fall along and play along. Right? If you don't, then you're not going to actually shift
yeah,
quickly enough. I mean, you have to remember, like, we only have
yeah,
like 10 years to solve this carbon crisis, right? And so the incumbent industry of energy, of transport, of ag, it has literally trillions of dollars
yeah,
locked up in it in potential
yeah.
investment, et cetera. And you need them to flip too, right? And so this is why Impossible Foods we have always I say we, I don't
Right.
work for the company anymore, I don't speak for them, but I mean, back in the day, we were always happy to partner with
Yeah,
Burger King, Starbucks, Walmart, et cetera. These are companies that are very much partnering with big beef
yeah,
and big ag,
yeah.
but you have to, I mean, that's reality. So it gives me a lot of pleasure to see that the big incumbent, big beef
Yes.
and big ag is really this with a lot of suspicion. They see it
As a threat.
correctly
Yeah,
as an
yeah.
existential
Well, I
threat,
mean, and that's
and they're throwing
I tend not to go to fast food burger places, but I know that they all of them, bar none, will
all of them.
have two or three vegetarian options, which is in that when you think of that, if you jump back 10 years, that McDonald's are going to have you're kidding, a veggie burger at McDonald's? No way, that'll never happen. And they all do now. I mean, and they sell
Yeah,
them as well. I mean, they shift a lot of them. Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, Burger King
Right.
was really the first, and they not only just created, their instinct in the beginning was, well, we need something for those few vegans who come in, and so we'll create
Yeah.
something and wrap it in green paper
Yes.
and put sprouts and wrap it in kale and
Yeah.
make it disgusting, right? And at Burger King, when we first started talking to them in 2019, actually, we were very clear, look, if you want to do this, really
Right.
go big. You're the second most valuable brand that Burger King has after Burger King itself is the
Yeah.
Whopper. Make it the
Yeah.
Impossible Whopper and go big or go home. Because if you're just trying to provide
Yeah.
some little sprouts and kale burger for the 2% of your audience that
Yeah.
doesn't eat meat, why would you even bother with a fairly expensive product, right, that takes up room in your meat
Yeah.
locker and everything else? Like, just go big and put it center of menu, center of plate. And as a result, they went huge and did the Impossible Whopper. It was at the time the single biggest launch that
Wow.
they've ever
Wow.
had with a single product. And it was all because their CMO at the time, this hilarious, great guy named Fernando Machado,
Right.
he got it. And he was the one who was like, okay, yeah, we don't put this in the sad vegan ghetto
Yeah.
of our menu. This is center of
Yeah.
plate. I got it. Right. And immediately it just went,
Yeah.
stratospheric. So that was great. But it's again, very similar to Tesla in that, at the time, now it's impossible, it's changed quite a bit, right? But we never had a proper like CMO. We didn't have advertising budget. We had a website, we did all of that kind of stuff, but we were not gonna like hire some big Madison
Yeah.
Avenue ad agency. Like, we want your true fans and evangelists to persuade
Yeah.
the non-believers. That's the most effective form
Yeah.
of conversion. It's not with these waningly influential advertisements. I
Yeah.
mean, people, like they
No.
just they don't care.
Yeah.
They gloss over that when they hear
Yeah.
ads, right? But when your friends and family are piercing into your social networks, when you and other media are saying, you
Yeah.
have to try this burger, I couldn't tell the difference. Oh,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
really interesting, right? I mean, it's just like to this day, Tesla has not done a classical advert.
No.
They have not had a classical CMO. They have not hired an ad agency, et cetera. Now, at some point, I
They might do.
presume
Yeah.
that will change, but you don't need that if you do it
Yeah.
right.
Well,
from
to have got to the
beginning.
point they
And
have
again,
now,
that's what Elon
it's
taught.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
If you'd said to a car executive 20 years ago, there'll be a brand that sells millions of cars, not hundreds of millions of cars, and it will not have had one advert on anywhere. They'd go, that's just impossible.
Yeah.
That just will never happen. And it's happened.
Yeah,
It's just, that is extraordinary.
Yeah, it's true. And by the way, Tesla is now, it has the number one sedan and the number one SUV in the world in terms of revenue, the Model 3 and the Model Y, and they don't do ads, right? The incumbent industry, the top 10 incumbent car makers, I did this calculation, they spend something like $100 billion collectively per year on advertising, marketing, and direct incentives to consumers. It's everything from like stupid Super Bowl ads to Wimbledon sponsorships to coupon circulars that you get in the mail, all that kind of stuff. And it is effectively just to eke out a 1 or 2% additional market share between Nissan and its arch rival Honda, right? Or whatever. And if they actually
developing
spent that
good
money
cars
on innovation, on R&D, we would already have flying solar electric fleet, zero transport, zero fatality, zero emission cars. It actually really angers me when I hear automakers, startups especially, and companies in the food industry, including Impossible, like, no, we just need to do ads. It's like, you don't get it.
No.
You really don't get the lesson that Elon has taught us. It's about innovation.
No, I mean, they really annoy me, and I can't even, whenever I see a car advert, it doesn't even matter if it's what type of car, even if it's for an electric car, it's always some guy who's probably too young to afford to drive that car anyway in normal circumstances, driving along an empty road in a city, and you go, I want to see one car advert where you see the guy get in the car and he drives around the corner from his house and he sits still in a massive traffic jam. That would be an honest car advert. Yeah. We're never going to see it. I want to leave that because I want to move on just really because so just to quickly explain, I think it was about 2009. I was in Los Angeles. Was it? No, it wasn't the time I was doing Impossible Burgers. No, it's too early. That 2009. and I went to a house, and I was making a show called Carpool, where I interviewed people in the car, and I had a big hybrid something or other. I can't remember what it was that time. I think it might have been a Toyota of some sort anyway. And I picked up this man called Jason Calacanis, and I drove him across Los Angeles to his office. And it was a really fun interview because I didn't have to ask any questions. I just drove him, and he went... And he was fascinating. He told me all about his brother and his startup in New York and 9/11 and what happened with his brother. Amazing, really great. So then that was that. Then cut forward however many years, and I go, and I knew a guy called Leo Laporte who does a tech blog from just north of San Francisco. He's the same age as me, similar background in traditional TV. Now he's a very successful, podcaster. And he and Jason Calacanis know each other very well. That's how I met Jason. So that was the connection. But then, so cut forward, I don't know how many years, 15 years, and I suddenly hear Jason Calacanis on a podcast called the Allin podcast, and that's how I came across it. And I listened to it a couple of times, and then people told me, "Oh, that's the number 1 podcast in the world." It's not just
it's the number 1 podcast in business technology. And there's 4 co-hosts, including my boss, Dave Friedberg, as the production board, and Jason, who's awesome. And Jason, by the way, remains a huge evangelist for electrification of the vehicle fleet. He was the first, I believe he had Tesla Model
number 1 or 2. He was definitely the 1 or 2. Yeah.
And he was defending Elon and EVs way back in the day, in the dark days of 2008, 2009. He's a real believer. And I'm really happy for the success he's had on that podcast.
Yeah. But then, so that's where I suddenly saw, I think they had, that was the event, was it their event in Los Angeles that you were talking about when we first started chatting today? Right.
Yeah, so we hosted this thing called the Allin Summit, which basically, 1,800 people, totally oversubscribed. I never in my life, at this stage in my life, would I think I would be like a college admissions officer rejecting people who wrote essays to attend the Allin Summit. But we had to reject thousands of people. And it was 1,800 people in LA in September. It was really, really fun. And I don't think there were probably a lot of people there who thought that, in 20 years they'll be driving an ICE. No one thinks that anymore, right? And Elon was a guest star. So he zoomed in from his jet.
I saw a bit of that. I think the thing was I wasn't following it that closely, but I was aware of it, and I saw a couple of the interviews they did, and I saw the interview with Elon. But then somehow, possibly on Instagram or somewhere, I suddenly saw, because I think of you as Impossible Foods, and so suddenly I went, "Oh my God, that's Rachel! What's she doing? Oh my God, she organized it! That woman is incredible."
Yeah. Well. Yeah. So, I joined this venture capital firm, Dave Friedberg's venture capital firm, like 2 years ago, because I thought, all right, well, I've done these amazing things. Tesla and Impossible have done more to decarbonize their respective industries than any other force, than any United Nations conference, than any group of nonprofits, even more than, Greta Thunberg, right? What's the common thread? And I thought, it's venture capital. So maybe if I go to venture capital, I can help, superpower the next generation of entrepreneurs and companies that continue this legacy. So that's why I joined it. And then the podcast just became absolutely a phenomenon in and of itself. And the co-host decided to put on the Allin Summit, and it was super fun.
I've got to say, very discreetly between you and me, David Friedberg's one of my favorites on the show. But I don't need to talk about any more of that. But then, so one of the other things that just caught my eye when I saw the other things you're doing is that Iron Ox is such a brilliant name. Even if the product is no good, Iron Ox, I love it. But this is about kind of automated robotic farming type area.
Yeah, this is is a company that is about trying to decarbonize
Right.
agriculture at the
Yeah.
point of the farm, right? And the idea is to apply robotics and AI to every aspect of farming, of
Right.
conventional farming, from the seedling, which is actually very
Yeah.
wasteful, all the way through to delivery. But it's really
Yeah.
difficult time right now in the world of ag tech and farm tech, right? Food tech. There were a lot of investors who I think came during the boom years of 2019, 2020, when like the United States had pumped $1 trillion of stimulus checks and everyone was
Right.
investing in everything. Um, the Silicon Valley has really changed, and I worry, frankly, about venture capitalists' appetite for these big, expensive, long-term
Yeah.
bets. I mean, again, just to go back to the beginning, back in 2008 and 9, even Elon, who was very well known in Silicon Valley as the PayPal mafia
Yeah.
wonder kid, right? He could not raise money, and it took him, I don't
Yeah.
even know, 15 years to become profitable. So I do worry about where is the next generation of innovation going to be getting
Yeah.
its funding, right? Because we still are facing this carbon crisis. You do need patient capital. You do need people who are just willing to grit it out. As Elon used to say, it's like death eating your face, or it's like
Right.
eating glass, right? Like when you're in that valley of death, it is really, really
Yeah.
hard place to be. So I hope that, if anything, I just want to encourage the entrepreneurs out here that, um, it is really hard. But again, Elon is by far the biggest
Yeah.
inspiration and example in that, with a portfolio that is largely focused on decarbonization or saving humanity from
Yeah.
its crises, we will you can make a
Yeah.
plenty of money and you can become the world's richest person, right? Again, you follow the money. So hopefully people who listen understand that and can really bend the trajectory of their own career toward climate tech. I think it is the most important thing
Yeah.
that anyone can
And then,
do.
I mean, just very quickly, just to finish off, because you're now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're working at the Stanford University Graduate School of Business. Are you doing lectures to potential future entrepreneurs and founders? And is that what that role is? I mean, just
Yeah.
can you just briefly explain what that involves?
Yeah, I co-lecture a class with this phenomenal journalist, 10-time Pulitzer Prize winning New York Times editor named Glenn Cramen. And he and I co-lecture a class called Winning Writing. And it's all about writing and communications. About a quarter of the class is from Stanford's John Doerr School of Sustainability. There are a lot of future
Right.
entrepreneurs, future CEOs, and business founders, obviously, who come through Stanford. It's really the creme de la creme of
Right.
entrepreneurship, right? And so the class ostensibly is all about writing, and we obviously focus on all of the rudiments of written communication that you're going to deal with as a
Yeah.
business executive. Everything from writing memos to the board to pitching your startup to providing feedback to people on your team, etc. But in reality, everyone who goes to business school, any business school in the world, you go there because you're thinking about a
Right.
pivot in
Yeah.
some manner, right? You want to switch your career, you want to turbocharge it, whatever. Like it is so inspiring
Yeah.
to be around these students, because you can really see that this is the future
Yeah.
of capitalism, right? I mean, right now my kid is, he's 18, he's at uni, and he is in environmental
Right.
studies program, right? It's becoming the number one studies program in the United States very quickly.
Right.
It's rising. It's kind of almost like the computer science major of 20 years
Yes.
ago, right? It's like becoming hot major. And again, if you don't see that as a sign that makes you profoundly optimistic, you are
Right.
not paying attention. This is where every teenager is interested in this. This is where universities are headed.
Yeah.
This is where entrepreneurship is headed. It's
Yeah.
really empowering. So it makes me
No,
really
it is
happy.
incredible. I mean, we really have to round it up because we're coming up to the fatal hour. But I mean, just literally, I could listen to you for 2-3 hours, and your energy is remarkable. I don't want to do too much of a Rachel Konrad fluff piece, you know. I mean, but you are an extraordinary force of nature, and it is an absolute joy to
I
catch
make
up with you. I
plenty
mean,
of mistakes. I make plenty
we
of
all do,
mistakes.
and
Trust me. I
yes,
mean, that's the thing about startups, though, is like, about 90% of what you do at a startup is
of
a
course, yeah,
failed experiment, right? It just does not work. And you have to be okay with that. And again, that's one of the things Elon taught me is like, if you're not experimenting, you're definitely going to fail, right? And see what works. And that's got to be the attitude, because otherwise, man, you're definitely going to fail if you don't even try. So yeah, I have my fair
But
share
you
of
have
failures
the odd
as well.
day off, I'm hoping.
Yeah, I try. I just came back
Oh,
from
right,
Mexico.
okay.
That was absolutely Thanksgiving break, so it tends to be a
Yeah,
little quieter. Stanford was on vacation, so yeah, I had a little
right.
tranquilo time
Oh, very
in
good.
Mexico jungle.
But listen, Rachel, it's been a real, genuine joy to catch up with you. I mean, hopefully I would love it if you could come to one of our shows in North America.
I'd
It
love
might be over
to.
the
Yeah,
border in Canada somewhere, but I mean, yeah, it would be really good.
or the UK, either
Yeah,
one. I would love it. That would
yeah.
be super fun. Yeah, I love coming to the UK.
Oh well, yeah,
That's
of course.
still,
Well, I mean, okay, we'll discuss this, but
yeah,
great
I'm
stuff.
here.
But
Tell me.
for
Yeah,
now, until next time, I just want to thank you very much for joining us. It's been great fun.
exactly. Thank you. Thank you so much, Robert. This is great. Yeah, I hope it wasn't too much
No, it's good. I think
reminiscing,
we
but
got through it very well. Great stuff. Well, I really hope you enjoyed that. I had to lie down after that. I mean, it's exhausting. She was going on to another meeting. She'd already done lectures at Stanford University Graduate School of Business that morning. It was early morning for her, it was late evening for me. What an amazing woman. We've got to get her back. She is extraordinary and such an absolute charmer. Really, really great fun to talk to. And maybe we can, what would be great, wouldn't it? I want to try and do that, is to see if I can do an interview with Carlos Ghosn from the Lebanon, because he is, I don't know why I call it the Lebanon, just call it Lebanon. He can't go anywhere else. Extraordinary. What an extraordinary story. Anyway, that's enough from me. I'm not even going to say subscribe because you already are. That's why you're watching this. As always, if you have been, thank you for listening.